one of the things that I do a lot is I fashion out texts for artists. So either for their artist statements or for, well, obviously for press releases, I need to write them. But it can be a very, very tough, frustrating process.
How can artists use storytelling to power their careers? This is Rahul from Artist Life Hacks and vPatina. I speak to Sebastian Ripson, a curator at WM Gallery in Amsterdam, and Steve Smith, a lecturer in photography at Nescol Aberdeen, to find out.
You were asking earlier on, I mean, especially given that some of the tools in photography have become more mainstream. Like when you started out 20 years ago, I remember it was pretty basic, right? We're using film. You're using film, not digital.
Yeah, but I, in some sense, I wouldn't say that was basic. I think if you've
okay, I stepped on a landmine there.
You can tell you've never been a photographer, Rahul. I think if you're
no, it's true. It's true.
If you're judging a reverse clip test from transparency film on a light box and trying to work out if you're pushing and pulling the film a quarter of a stop.
Okay. Give me a chance to get my foot out of my mouth. Okay? I get back on topic, right? Touche. But what the question that you're putting to Sebastian about what does it take? What does it take to get noticed by a gallery, right? And it kind of ties into what you said, which is that you have a lot of people who may have technical talent and may be able to compose a picture, right? Sure. Right. But what I find about the artists of your gallery is that they have really loud voices. They have really strong stories to tell. The one piece that I remember from your gallery that really still haunts me was she was a photographer and she photographed a brick, right? And she photographed each side of the brick, right? And then she kind of printed it out at a 1-to-1 scale, and then framed it, but in such a way that you could fold it and then recreate the brick, right? But the brick was from Auschwitz. And her grandparents were Holocaust survivors, right? So then when you're looking at it, it is incredibly haunting because normally when you photograph a brick, it means nothing. For her, it means everything, right? And that was just like this. I mean, it's like, the way you tell your story about coming back to Aberdeen after all your journeys, that has real meaning to you, right? This had the same meaning to her.
Yeah.
And I still remember that, and I still kind of remember looking at that, and I was almost thinking about buying it, but then I was like, it's too painful. It's
right.
Yeah,
you
remember
it's
that?
The larger percentage, I guess, of our job certainly over the last number of years is to actually try to get learners to engage with why, why are they taking pictures, and what are they pointing the camera at. Content is key, but again, it's nice to talk about story and narrative and context, because photography is in a sense so easy, now, and so we have to, we have to consider that to the greatest respect. Everyone takes pictures. We create billions, trillions of photographs a day, and obviously, technology's allowed the platforms for everyone to engage with that, whether it's Facebook, DeviantArt, Instagram. The statistics and the figures are massive. So, it's all about context. It's all about, early sort of young students coming into the college framework, I think often have never really answered that question. And they need to know about aperture and shutter speed and the mechanics, and that's fine. It's part of our role. We have to give them the tools to allow them a voice.
Yeah.
And even when they've got a strong voice, I've had conversations with yourself, Rahul, before about how do you then put that into words? How do you translate that into a different language? Into the written text, to really, I suppose, underpin and support what you want to say with a visual narrative. And then how do you present that to the galleries? It's not necessarily an easy process.
No, it's quite tough. Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, it's interesting what you say, because actually that's one of the things that I do a lot, is I fashion out texts for artists. So either for their artist statements or for, well, obviously for press releases, I need to write them. But it can be a very, very tough, frustrating process. Some people are obviously, gifted linguistically in terms of language or whatever. They're good. They compose good pieces of writing. That being said, I think many visual artists didn't become visual artists for nothing, and many of them do have a problem with language, with how to express, literally how to express. And they do that very well through visual means. But so I've had incredibly tough sessions with artists that have been basically interviewing, trying to figure out, okay, so what is that red thread? What is the consistency of your, I wouldn't even say message, but what is the consistency? How do you want it present? Like you said, how do you present it in different language other than the visual? And sometimes it's been, usually it's very fulfilling, because I like writing a lot. So when I come out with a text that I'm happy with and that the artist is happy with, that's a beautiful thing, then my creativity, I can kind of pour in my creativity into that. But I've also had situations where, not many, but a couple, where it's been so difficult to try and express what that artist wants to say, that we've come, I wouldn't say come to blows, but to a situation where I had to make the decision, listen, I don't think we can go, I don't think we can move forward, because I like what you do, visually speaking, but if our communication is so incredibly difficult, if whatever I write, you can't get behind, you can't understand, or let me put it differently, if whatever I write doesn't meet your expectations of what you want to express, and we've tried it once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, then it's not going to work between us, because somehow our language just does not fit. We do not understand each other. We do not see eye to eye. So yeah, I've had that. I have that, like, I think twice in quite a long career, but it was a tough pill to swallow, to be honest, because it's like failure in a certain sense.
Yeah, to be honest, there's I suppose in many respects we get a lot of students that come into photography that maybe have underachieved in academia, in maybe, let's say, the science subjects, and also in terms of English and maths, and it's quite daunting. They only need to look at Susan Sontag and John Berger and Wells, and the language is beyond them in a sense.
Yeah.
And they go to galleries, and unless it's very easily understood, the text, it feels like they're entering a different world in terms of representation of art. Mm-hmm. And they can be some of the greatest kind of visual practitioners that we've had throughout the college, but it's daunting for them, and sometimes it's off-putting, and they feel that they can't necessarily engage, or almost in some sense they can't defend their work. And it seems a shame that that's the starting point. They feel like they're having to defend and kind of justify the strength of the work, and right. they're not in a position to let the work speak for itself. Mm-hmm. And we've got to try and break that down. I think there's battles between colleges and universities, where universities often, and not all universities, depending the structure of them, but often students will learn more about the sort of contextualization of their work and little about the practical skills, you know. So it's just a really fine balance. I just, you know, I'm very much aware of the two different languages, and I think the art gallery represents that kind of meeting point where it's as we discussed, it's necessary for the audience to have both of those languages meeting together to. But like I said, it's a shame when students or any young practitioner feels that they're having to defend what they've taken a lot of pride in, they've spent a lot of time in.
Right.
But the other side of that is it's really interesting to find that that's a supportive role that the gallery can help with. You know, I had an earlier question I was going to ask. We touched very briefly on the sales process in terms, and I don't mean the kind of the hard sort of corporate sales process. My thought was around fine art prints and limited edition prints and that whole kind of dynamic. You know, if I had a young student, a young artist that wanted to not so much be represented by a gallery but put on a show, would you expect that person to know about limited edition prints, to know about certificates of authenticity, to know about you know, the number of runs and artist proofs? Or do you have artists and young artists that come in who know nothing, and you have to educate them and you have to work with them through that sales process?
I do. I have that more often than I'd expect, honestly. I mean, obviously, I've been working so long in this field that I expect it nowadays. But I have older artists, mid-career artists that I need to, you know, talk to about editions, about certificates, about preuve d'artiste. I mean, things that you would expect people, definitely mid-career, to know. And it's just, yeah, it's part of that story. I just want to get back to that language thing again. The way that you said it was for a lot of young visual practitioners, it was quite daunting to see, you know, to read text and to see the text that had come up on the walls and in press releases and statements and so forth. And to be honest, I find it daunting as well. You know, I work with language a lot for many years now. And I still find it daunting. In fact, sometimes I got really upset when I look at a wall where there's a text on it, and it's the text, obviously it's about the show. And I'm reading this thing without having seen the show before. And I'm thinking, what on earth is this about? You know, I mean, why does it always have to be about time and space and the way that it's stretched out or, you know, compacted into a little kernel of something? So what I try to do in my texts and the way that I try to talk to the artists that I have to write something about, or that we write something together, that happens a lot too, is just write what you know, just write what makes sense to you. You know, if I don't know, your childhood cultural reference is Star Wars, use Star Wars. If you don't understand Susan Sontag, don't mention her, or just say, you know, if you really want to in the text, you know, Susan Sontag said this, I don't understand it, but you know, I do understand that. So I always try to, together with the artist, try to come back to that kind of that gut feeling, that visceral type of emotion that's attached to their work, that they attach to their own work, and see if we can fashion out words that make sense for them. And very often, not always, but very often that works well. So I don't know if that makes my texts any better, but at least it makes them that I understand them. And I think most of my public do understand that. I try to eschew like the really, well, honestly, the intellectual references that I do not understand, that I don't go for that.
Well, it helps if they're authentic. Sometimes you walk in and you just feel like it's been written by Google Scholar or something.
No, absolutely. You know? I mean, I have an artist that I've worked with several times. It's a Polish artist, and he's incredibly intelligent, like genius intelligent. And the way that he writes, I mean, I've written text for him, usually with him. But he's amazing in terms of language. He writes in Polish and Spanish and in English. But he can quote, you know, he can make references to the most obscure intellectual pieces of writing from the 19th century to, you know, porn. I mean, he will reference anything, and it makes sense. It really does.